Everyone knows Elon Musk. You know what Jeff Bezos looks like on a yacht. You've seen Mark Zuckerberg get punched in an octagon, and Warren Buffett eat the same McDonald's breakfast for 40 years. But I challenge you to name 5 Chinese billionaires. Take your time, go ahead, and know what you're going to say. Most people get stuck on Jack Ma. He was once the richest man in Asia. Today, he doesn't even crack the top 5 in his own country. Here's what the Western media barely covered. In March 2026, for the first time in history, China officially overtook the United States as the country with the most billionaires on Earth. 1,110 against 1,000. One of them made his entire fortune selling bottled water. Another one built the app your kids are addicted to. These are some of the wealthiest and most powerful entrepreneurs on Earth. They run companies that touch billions of lives, and most people outside of China couldn't pick a single one of them out of a lineup. By the end of this video, you'll know their names, their faces, and the one pattern that connects almost all of them. Because wealth in China follows a logic that doesn't exist in the West. It's a system. I'll explain everything to you, but before we get into it, if you're running a business internationally or even just thinking about it, this is the kind of stuff we cover every week. How money and business actually work in Asia from people who operate here. Hit subscribe, it takes 2 seconds. The average American can name more Kardashians than Chinese billionaires. That's not ignorance, or maybe it is. But for sure, it's a blind spot built into the way wealth gets covered in the West. When the billionaire in the US builds something, the whole world watches. They go on podcasts, they buy a sports team, they tweet at 3 a.m. about cryptocurrency. They get profiled in every magazine that will have them. Wealth in the West is a performance. The richer you get, the louder you become. Yeah! China produced more new billionaires than any country on Earth last year, and almost none of them gave a single interview about it. No podcast tours, no keynotes at Davos, no battles with regulators played out on social media. Shanshan alone now has more billionaires than London, and most of them operate like they'd rather you didn't know they existed. That's not an accident. In China, visibility is a liability. The people at the top of the wealth rankings learned that lesson the hard way, watching what happened to those who came before them. So they built in silence, stay off camera, and let the numbers do the talking. Which brings us to the man at the very top of the list. Zhong Shanshan is worth over $70 billion. The richest man in China right now didn't build an app. He didn't launch a platform. He sells water. He's the founder of Nongfu Spring, the biggest bottled water company in China. If you've been anywhere in mainland China, you've seen the red cap. It's at every convenience store. Chinese media calls him the lone wolf. He has no known business allies, skips every business conference, and nobody outside his closest circle is sure where he actually lives. He still controls 84% of his own company, which in China's corporate landscape is almost unheard of. His backstory reads like a novel. He dropped out of school during the Cultural Revolution, worked construction, failed the university entrance exam, and eventually talked his way into a workers' college. He spent years as a reporter traveling across rural China, interviewing the kind of entrepreneurs he hadn't yet become. Then he tried business himself. Mushroom farming on Hainan Islands, shrimp trading, both collapsed. He ended up selling drinks for a competitor called Wahaha. He was 42 when he finally started Nongfu Spring, and his first big move was a gamble that looked reckless at the time. He pulled all of his purified water off the shelves and repositioned the entire brand around natural mineral water at a moment when every other company in the country was selling the purified stuff. He bet that Chinese consumers will pay a premium for water that felt closer to nature. The entire industry thought he was finished. What they missed is that China was entering the biggest consumer spending boom in human history. Hundreds of millions of people were moving into the middle class, switching from tap water to packaged drinks, and willing to pay more for a product that felt premium. Zhong wasn't just selling water. He was riding a wave that the state had been building for years through urbanization, infrastructure, and rising wages. 24 years later, the IPO landed. The market finally got to price where he had been building quietly for 2 decades. Overnight, a man who sells water for 50 cents a bottle became richer than any billionaire in Europe. And outside of China, almost nobody noticed. Zhong Shanshan saw where China's domestic economy was heading and built on top of it before the rest of the market caught up. That's the pattern. The next group of billionaires did exactly the same thing, except the opportunity didn't come from rising consumer spending. It came from Washington cutting China off from American technology. In late 2020, a man named Zhang left his job. That alone wouldn't be remarkable, except for where he had spent the previous 15 years. Zhang was NVIDIA's global VP for China. He had overseen the company's entire expansion across the country, built relationships with every major client, and understood the architecture of NVIDIA's chip as well as anyone outside the engineering labs. Then, the US export controls started tightening. Washington began restricting which chips could be sold to Chinese companies, cutting off access to the most advanced GPUs that power AI training. Beijing's response was immediate. Semiconductor self-sufficiency became a national security objective. State money flooded into domestic chip programs. Government procurement mandates started requiring Chinese-made components. The door was closing on American chips, and a massive new market was opening on the other side. Zhang watched the door closing in real time, and instead of staying on the American side of it, he walked through it. He founded More Threads in 2020. 5 years later, More Threads is valued at $45 billion. The company was placed on the US Entity List in 2023, which means it can no longer access American manufacturing tools. Zhang doesn't seem bothered. His biggest clients are Chinese military and government agencies that are now required by law to source 100% of their chips domestically. The sanctions didn't kill his business, they guaranteed his customer base. He didn't go alone. 3 other NVIDIA China's veterans co-founded the company with him. The pattern repeats across the industry. Chen Weiliang spent 14 years at AMD, rising to senior director. When he decided to leave, he didn't make a dramatic announcement. He sat in cafes with a handful of former AMD colleagues, sketched out a strategy on paper, and recruited them one by one to join his new company, MetaX. The plan was straightforward: build a Chinese GPU that could do what AMD's chips did, without needing AMD. MetaX went public in late 2025. On its first day of trading, the stock surged 692%. Chen is now worth over $4 billion. One of his biggest clients is a subsidiary of a Beijing-backed conglomerate that funnels domestic chips directly into government data centers. These are not startup kids working out of garages. These are senior executives who spend a decade or more inside the most powerful American tech companies. They understood the products at an engineering level, they had the client relationships and the institutional knowledge, and they took all of it home. But we still haven't talked about the real heavyweights. If the defectors rode the sanctions wave, the people at the very top of China's wealth ranking rode something even bigger. If you're finding this useful, do me a favor and hit subscribe. I put out content like this every week on Asia, on where the money moves, and what it means for entrepreneurs. It takes 2 seconds and you won't regret it. Zhong Yiming is worth around $65 billion. He founded ByteDance in 2012, which owns TikTok, Douyin, and Toutiao. More than 1 billion people use his products every month. Yet, he resigned from his own company at 38, moved to Singapore, and barely appeared in public for 4 years. There's a decent chance you've never seen a photograph of him. He grew up in Longyan, a small city in Fujian province. Both his parents were civil servants. He studied software engineering at Nankai University, got a job at a travel search startup as employee number 5, then worked at Microsoft. A job he apparently hated because the corporate rules drove him crazy. He quit, joined a tiny startup that failed, then started his own real estate search site that also went nowhere. ByteDance came from frustration. In 2012, Chinese smartphone users were drowning in bad apps, and the search giant Baidu was mixing ads into results so aggressively that people couldn't tell what was real anymore. Zhang's idea was to skip search entirely and push content to people using AI recommendation. Almost every venture capitalist he pitched told him no. The first money came from a niche trading firm most people in tech had never heard of. His timing was perfect, and he was in luck. China was in the middle of the fastest smartphone adoption in history. The state has spent years building out mobile infrastructure, pushing 4G into every province, and creating the conditions for 1 billion people to come online through their phones in under a decade. Zhong didn't build the wave. He saw it forming before the surf was crowded. Within 2 years, Toutiao had 13 million daily users. Within 5, TikTok was reshaping how an entire generation consumes media worldwide. Revenue hit $155 billion in 2024. And then, Zhang walked away. In 2021, he published a letter to his employees explaining that he was stepping down as a CEO. The letter was remarkably honest. He described himself as a bad manager, says he prefers reading and listening to music over running meetings. He surfaced once in late 2025 at a Shanghai university to launch a talent incubator for teenagers interested in math and AI. This was his first public appearance in 4 years. The man built the most downloaded app on earth. He could be the most famous entrepreneurs in the world if he wanted to. He chose to disappear instead. The pattern holds across the top of the list. Pony Ma, the man behind Tencent, is worth over $53 billion and runs what is arguably the most powerful tech ecosystem in Asia. Tencent owns WeChat, which has over 1 billion users, is the biggest gaming investor on the planet, with stakes in Epic Games, Riot Games, and Supercell. It has its fingers in cloud computing, AI, fintech, music streaming. If you play video games or you use social media, there's a good chance Tencent is somewhere in the chain. Pony Ma co-founded the company in 1998 with university classmates. Nobody is sure where he lives. He almost never speaks to Western media. One journalist described him as almost reclusive. Even those who track Chinese billionaires for decades say the most notable things about Pony Ma is that there's nothing notable to report. He just runs his company. 3 of the 5 richest people in China, a combined fortune north of 190 billion US dollar. And between them, fewer public appearances in the last 5 years than Elon Musk has in an average week. In the West, billionaires fight for your attention. In China, the richest people in the country are fighting to avoid it. I could go on and on. There are dozens more names of billionaires like this. Maybe I will make another video about this subject, who knows. But what I want you to understand today is that every one of those businesses were built in a sector that Beijing had designated as a national priority. AI, semiconductors, foundational models. Billionaires we mentioned benefited from a system that doesn't exist anywhere in the West. State capital flowing into their sector, procurement mandates guaranteeing demand, and infrastructure built out specifically to support them. The good news is that China just published its next shopping list. The 15th five-year plan just came out in March. It covers 2026 to 2030, and it tells you exactly where the next trillion-dollar markets are being built. 6 sectors have been designated as emerging national pillars: integrated circuits, intelligent robots, the low-altitude economy, biotech, new materials, and aerospace. These sectors were worth about 6 trillion yuan last year. Beijing expects them to cross 10 trillion by 2030. On top of that, AI-related industries alone are projected to hit 10 trillion yuan by the end of the decade. The government is allocating 1.3 trillion yuan this year just for science and tech development. This is the roadmap. The next wave of Chinese billionaires will come from these sectors. And the entrepreneurs who position themselves in Asia to access these supply chains, these markets, these technologies early, will have an advantage that gets harder to replicate every year that passes. At Statrys, we help entrepreneurs do exactly that every day, setting up in Hong Kong and Singapore to access these ecosystems. If that's something you're thinking about, the link is below. And don't forget, if you learned something from this video, subscribe. Every week on this channel, we break down how business and money really work in Asia. No filter, no jargon, straight from people who've been underground here for over 2 decades. See you in the next one.